Alyx! Alyx, the signal's back. Can you hear me? Are you okay?
Russell, I'm good. How's Dad?
They've got him on the train. He's on the move. You've got to find Fairview Junction before they get there.
I'm working on it.
So anything happened when you cut out?
You're not gonna believe this, but I ran into a Vortigaunt.
A Barnacles? What was he doing down there?
Hiding. I think he escaped from the Combine.
What did he say?
You ever meet a Vortigaunt? He said crazy Vortigaunt stuff.
We spend time on every game design element thinking about how the player is expected to learn of its existence and understand its details. Some design elements are so important that the game experience will break if the player doesn't understand them, while others may just be fun diversions or rewards for exploring the game's systems. Any required element will require work on our part to teach the player. In Half-Life, we try to teach elements in ways that feel as natural as possible, entwined within the core flow of the game so that you don't feel like the game just stopped to teach you something. We don't always succeed, but the attempts usually lead us somewhere interesting. In this case, we need to teach the players about the armored headcrab. The key elements that we want them to understand are that the headcrab is invulnerable on the top, but has a weak spot on its belly. We would also like the player to learn that the headcrab exposes its weak spot right before it jumps, but this isn't required. The player can fall back to shooting the weak spot as the headcrab scrambles around after a leap.
Teaching design elements of enemies is always tricky. Players have shown us for years that it's really hard to learn something new while under attack. We've also seen that invulnerability, in particular, is a difficult enemy feature to teach. If players are blasting away at an enemy, they are often not paying close attention to the impact feedback. If the enemy is vulnerable in some areas and not others, players may kill the enemy with a spray of gunfire, not realizing that some of their shots did nothing, while others hit critical weak spots. So when we approached the armored headcrab training, we knew we'd need to do significant work. The first step was to avoid placing the player under duress by containing the enemies inside this wire fence. Next, we placed headcrabs at eye level facing the player, exposing their bright, pulsing weak spot. If the player shoots one immediately, they are rewarded with a unique death effect where the headcrab explodes into chunks. This effect is designed to show the player that they did something special to kill this headcrab, as opposed to how they've been killing headcrabs up until now. There are a couple of other pieces in the setup here that are important. A second headcrab is placed right behind the lock the player must shoot to enter the cage, encouraging the player to notice the weak spot and try shooting it. 2 more headcrabs are loose in the cage, scripted to repeatedly attack invisible points on the wire fence. This ensures they are constantly demonstrating the way they expose their weak points before they leap, and this allows players to practice hitting the weak spot from behind the safety of the fence.
With any section of natural entwined training, we've observed that there's rarely any one thing that succeeds in teaching all players, nor do 100% of players leave with the perfect understanding we'd like. If player understanding is absolutely critical, we have to build a more bulletproof gate that ensures the player demonstrates understanding before moving onwards. In fact, we do just that when the player acquires the shotgun in the next area. In the case of the armoured headcrab, however, playtesting showed that we could afford to let a few players through with less than perfect understanding. This section gave them enough of a chance to experiment that they got a sense of what was going on, and further encounters with armoured headcrabs solidified it. There was still a lot of iteration on the visual design of the headcrab to further drive home its armour and weak point, and we also added a custom response to shotgun fire. In that case, the armoured headcrab flips over and wriggles for a second, exposing its weak point. This was added to reduce the resource loss we saw happening in players who were still struggling to understand the armoured headcrab mechanics after they acquired the shotgun.
Oh, that Vortigaunt I met? He did give me a headcrab to eat.
Oh, great! What did it taste like? Tell me how you...
Russell, I didn't eat it.
Right. Of course you didn't. No, that's the right decision.
Oh, that zombie has a shotgun.
One challenge we always face when giving a new weapon or tool to the player is ensuring that they collect it before moving on. In these cases, we try to establish some kind of gate that the player can only get past using the new item. This can be especially tricky in cases where we are giving the player a new tool that doesn't fundamentally change their capabilities, as in the case of the shotgun, where almost everything that can be done with the shotgun can also be done with the pistol. In contrast, the pistol gate, where the player had to acquire the pistol before being able to shoot the lock off of the fence back at Russell's lab, was simple to design and execute. For this shotgun gate, we not only needed to ensure that the player collected the shotgun, but also that they learned how to load it before proceeding. We playtested a number of approaches to teaching the reload mechanics during combat, and repeatedly found that it didn't work. When faced with learning a new, complex task under duress, players would retreat back to using their pistol, which was a known quantity to them.
Once the player has collected the shotgun, they are only halfway through the shotgun gate. Next, they need to learn how to reload it. To drive home the necessity for the player to learn how to use this new weapon, we added an incoming threat, using a variety of audio and visual effects to sell it. While our goal is to make the player feel like they have a limited amount of time, the time pressure is entirely fake, and everything proceeds based on the player's progress in loading the shotgun for the first time. Once the shotgun has been loaded, a short timer starts, after which zombies burst through the walls. If the player happens to look at the walls before that timer is up, we abort the timer and introduce the zombies. The combination of a timer and a look trigger is a common trick used in places where we'd like the player to see a neat visual moment, but we can't wait forever or the game simply won't progress. The breaking of the walls by the zombies is the final step in opening the shotgun gate. Having new enemies open the way forward when they enter the player's space is a fairly tried and true method, but it's never one we're particularly happy with. It's always a bit too convenient and lacks agency on the player's part. But in a setup like this, which contains a novel puzzle, a new weapon, and its associated mechanics, plus an ambush, we're already dealing with a lot of design complexity packed into a small space, and further additions would complicate the scenario even further.
Whoa!
Do you hear that?
Yeah. Let's get this shotgun and get out of here. Got it!
Hurry up and load that thing, it's getting louder.
Last four. We did it.
I love this gun.
I'm out.
The visual design of the shotgun included a number of challenges. Shotguns in games are generally powerful, and we communicate that power with bulk. As a result, they're big and held in two hands. But our experiments with two-handed VR weaponry didn't reach a level we were satisfied with. When holding a two-handed object in real life, the object itself provides a physical connection between the two hands, and that constraint allows players to stop thinking about it consciously, in addition to providing physical feedback. In VR, without that connection or feedback, we found that players had to keep maintaining their own internal sense of how they were holding their two-handed weapon, or they drift their hands into positions that were hard for us to reconcile. As a result, our two-handed weapons required players to play along more than we liked. Since one of our core goals with Half-Life Alyx was to allow players to fully immerse themselves by ceasing to think about what they were doing in real life, we decided to focus on single-handed weapons, including the shotgun.
Our initial instinct with the shotgun design was to use a regular real-world shotgun, but modified, with a sawn-off stock and barrel so it would seem less cumbersome when held with one hand. This approach always resulted in the handle being at the rear of the weapon, and we ran into the problem where the weapon always felt front heavy. But obviously, the VR controller in your hand wouldn't reflect that, leading to a disconnect between what you were feeling and what you were seeing. Placing the handle more centrally and underneath the weapon helped avoid this disconnect. This implied centre of mass wasn't really maintained well as the weapon accrued upgrades throughout the game, but the first impression was the most critical. Since we were going with an odd form, we were keen to use common shotgun visual elements wherever we could to help with player recognition and to ground the design in some reality. One element we borrowed was a common shotgun tube magazine that stores shells horizontally in line with the barrel, and we were just able to fit the gameplay requirement of 6 shells without the overall length becoming unwieldy. You can see the effort we had to go for further shell capacity in the design of our autoloader upgrade. Our first reloading mechanic was based on the realistic insertion of 1 shell at a time. Playtesters found this to be overly tedious, although we did receive some positive comments that it made them feel like an action movie star. The simple addition of allowing the players to insert 2 shells at a time solved this issue, allowing us to keep the good part of the design whilst losing the bad. We were keen to reinforce the whole action movie star thing, and experimented with some big gesture the player could do to finalise reloading. The inclusion of a pop-up mechanism allowed us to add an additional step to the reload that further separated it from our other weapons, yet had a satisfying flick of the wrist to complete the action.
Alyx? Alyx!
As with the shotgun and the pistol, we needed a gate for the flashlight to ensure the player couldn't proceed without it. We tried a number of designs around the moment where the player collected the flashlight, but they all ended up being about the player picking up an object, and not specific to that object being a flashlight. Given that the flashlight's primary function is to provide light, we felt the gate needed to be an area of darkness. We also really wanted the player to be excited to get the flashlight, and that meant they had to experience darkness before collecting the flashlight. This turned out to be an interesting challenge because we already had many poorly lit areas prior to this, and now we needed an area that was so dark that players would correctly interpret it as a gate. Our initial implementation was simply to ensure there were no lights within the hallway. Unfortunately, playtesting immediately showed that wasn't enough. Some VR headsets have extremely low black levels, and on those headsets, enough light bounced in from this lit area to enable players to move forward. In addition, Our low ground fog provided just enough contrast in the dark hallway for players to make out the scene and stumble through it. Even once we removed fog and bounce light in this area, we saw yet other ways that players tried to move forward. Some players would fire their pistol repeatedly, using the muzzle flash as a strobing light source. Others would use the teleport targeting UI to probe the room, because at that point in the project, it had a small light source attached to it. In the end, we disabled muzzle flashes inside the hallway, and the teleport UI lost its light. The final step was the addition of some dialogue from Alyx, commenting on the darkness and her need for a light source. This was aimed at solving a perceptual problem. Up until now, our game has taught players that their goal is to continue moving forward. And any time that forward progress is blocked, it's because there's something in the local area that needs solving. Given that structure, it's entirely rational for players to do everything they can to find some way to see in the darkness ahead. Alyx's dialogue is aimed at telling the player that the game has recognized their attempts to move forward here, but the solution lies elsewhere. Subsequent playtesting showed us that this dialogue, coupled with the brightly lit area containing zombies off to the right, helped tug players past the darkness entrance and on towards the flashlight.
Like hacking and environmental puzzles, toner puzzles like this one are often used to relieve tension from combat and engage the player's mind in a refreshing way. This puzzle introduces a new junction type, which has 2 inputs and 2 outputs, as well as branching circuits. Functionally, it's just a simple airlock. Only one of the main combine gates can be powered on at a time, with an additional wrinkle that the smaller side gate on the return path must be powered down separately. In addition to providing a break between hectic combat encounters, this puzzle is a gameplay mechanic refresher, since it's been some time since the player has seen a toner puzzle, and the next ones start to ramp up in complexity.
Whew. It is dark.
Everything all right?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good. Oh, thank God.
In prior Half-Life games, the flashlight was attached to the player's body, which meant that it always illuminated the world from the same angle, relative to the player's point of view. With tracked hands in VR, we had the opportunity to let players manipulate the flashlight directly, and playtesters reacted very positively to this new freedom. In fact, our earliest implementation of a flashlight in Half-Life Alyx was an object that could be picked up in either hand or even set back down. This allowed the player to put the flashlight down somewhere, providing illumination for themselves while they accomplished another task. Unfortunately, this presented the possibility that a player could leave the flashlight behind, which would have been a game-breaking scenario. Implementing the flashlight as an object that players had to hold also prevented them from holding something else in that hand, which was tedious to manage and simply too punishing of a trade-off. In particular, it meant that weapon reloading was a nightmare, because the player no longer had a free offhand to perform the reload actions. In the end, we settled on a flashlight that attaches to the offhand and turns on and off automatically. This fixes the issues with reloading in the dark, potentially losing the flashlight, and has the nice side effect of not requiring the allocation of a button to toggle the light, which is especially helpful on controllers with fewer buttons. Since the automatic on-off behavior is controlled using level logic, designers could make performance and quality trade-offs in different areas of the game. After all, if a player could turn the flashlight on at any time, the rendering overhead of this shadow-casting light source would have to be accounted for throughout the entire game. On the other hand, if the flashlight is known to be off in a given area, a designer can make use of the resulting rendering headroom by increasing the fidelity of the environment in other ways.
Shortly after adding the flashlight to the game, we discovered the playtesters would frequently brace their gun hand with their flashlight hand. This meant that the players had to orient their flashlight hand awkwardly to align the light with their aim. We decided to make this an automatic behavior of the offhand whenever it was brought close to the grip of the gun. If you do this, you'll see that the offhand grips the gun in a natural pose, and the flashlight aligns with the aim. In fact, if you look closely at the end of the flashlight, you'll notice that it has a ball joint. This allows the flashlight to articulate based on whether the offhand is gripping the gun or not. The ball joint has 4 different orientations, one for each gun, and a neutral orientation for when the player is not supporting the gun to aim. These 4 orientations ensure that the flashlight is always pointed in an ideal direction for the player. In one-handed mode, the flashlight attaches to the gun hand at an orientation that is ideal for all scenarios.
All right, Russ. Really need you to talk again.
Absolutely. Beast of pain.
Before. What was life like before the Combine?
Ah, excellent. Alex, have you ever heard of a club sandwich?
Nope. Not once.
Right. To make a club sandwich, you need to start with bread. Not from a bread line, from a bakery across the street. Baked that day, okay? You add tomatoes, lettuce, not vegetable paste, fresh. Then you add bacon. That's from an animal we used to call the pig. You toast the bread and you put all that inside it.
You guys had all that? That's insane.
It is, and I'm not done. Then you add a second sandwich on top of the first one. You put ham in it, also from a pig, and turkey from an animal we used to call the turkey, and more tomato, more lettuce, and a bunch of other things I'm forgetting. It was 6 inches tall and weighed a pound, and had a dozen ingredients from 5 different continents. It was the most impossible food item you could imagine in any age before ours.
Wow.
I know, right?
That is... wow.
When the writers
Thanks,
create a
Russ.
new character, they try to write a variety of material from that character's perspective to help find their voice. What motivates them? What do they sound like? How do they relate to other characters? It's helpful to know the answers to questions like this early in a project, particularly when working with a team, where different people might end up writing for that character. The club sandwich story that Russell tells in this section started out as one of these writing sessions. The writing team wrote pages and pages, Russell telling Alex stories about life before the Combine, getting irritated with her, telling bad jokes, pretty much the whole emotional spectrum. As we refined Russell's character, almost all of that fell by the wayside. We needed to do that work to get to Russell, but most of it didn't sound like Russell anymore. Later in the project, we decided to make Alex scared of the dark, so we needed Russell to talk a lot in this section to keep Alex company. It didn't matter what he was saying, it just had to be this voice in the darkness that she was grabbing onto. And then we remembered, hey, didn't we write a rambling sandwich monologue a year ago? And the club sandwich speech was resurrected. When the writers create a new character, we try to write a variety of material.
Wait, is that a dead Combine soldier?
Yeah. When you guys were off stealing the reactor, I saw the Combine moving supplies in here. So, I guess they're interested in this place again.
Right, we'll keep an eye out. Something's definitely up.
Okay, so, right now, what it's like to live on Earth on a scale of 1 to 10. I'd say we're at a 2.
Yep, could always get worse.
What would you rate it before the Combine showed up?
Ooh, that's a toughie. I don't know. Good day? I'd say 6. Yeah, strong 6.
6? That's not great.
Well, that's life, Alex. You know, it's not always great.
Well, maybe we get the Combine off Earth and we could shoot for like an 8, you know?
Ooh, an 8. Yeah, that really would be nice. Really nice.
When building a Half-Life game, we try to start playtesting as soon as we can, even when we only have 10 or 15 minutes of gameplay built. We find it extremely helpful to see how players are reacting to what we've made as soon as possible. One of the major ways playtesting impacted Half-Life Alyx was in revealing how players reacted to the density of interactive elements in the world. Before we began, we were already aware that players would likely spend more time paying attention to the details of the world around them in VR, but we were unprepared for how significant this would be. Seeing some players spend 30 minutes messing around with a single interactive object really opened our eyes. As a result of those playtesting observations, we spent much of our development time focusing on the environment around the player and the level of details and interactivity to be found there. It might seem surprising that we didn't start with the assumption that we wouldn't need to spend that amount of time on the world, but the reality of game development is that we always have a finite amount of time to build a game and we're always making trade-offs. In the ideal case, we spend our finite time on whatever contributes the most to the player's experience. So, playtesting early and thereby getting a better sense of what elements are contributing to the player experience help us understand where to spend the limited time we have. In this case, those early playtests told us to significantly increase the amount we should budget for creating the world detail and interactivity.
Barnacles are a unique enemy type in Half-Life Alyx in that they are static and often situated above the player's natural view direction. During testing in confined or dimly lit spaces, we often saw players walk into barnacle tongues without noticing them. One way we addressed this was with audio. In particular, we made idle barnacles emit subtle breathing, croaking, and grumbling sounds like the following. These sounds helped alert players to the presence of barnacles, and also made them seem like living creatures that were always active, not just a mechanical piece of gameplay that responded only to the player's actions. The head-related transfer functions available in Steam Audio were especially helpful, as they made it possible to accurately spatialize barnacle sounds so that the players could tell that the sounds were coming from above.
Incarnations of Manhacks were frustrating to fight in VR, since their audio was not providing enough information about their location. They seemed to appear from nowhere, and even when close to the player, they lacked a dramatic presence. We tried a variety of layered sounds with varying distance fall-offs, but this often created more confusion, especially when multiple Manhacks were nearby. Our ultimate solution to the problem consisted of two parts. The first was to make Manhacks emit the following alarm-like warning sound when they first came into range or were deployed by a Combine soldier. The second part of our solution was to add more aggressive looping sounds with short fall-off distances.
Last four.
The short fall-off of these sound loops meant that this specific component of Manhack's sound treatment would only be audible quite near the player. Thus, when players heard these sounds, they knew that Manhacks had begun hunting them, and one or more was getting close enough to be of concern.
Before Final Out was added, the clamped up area of this level did not take players very long to traverse. But as the fidelity of the game increased, players spent more and more time getting to this point. As we've learned over the years, too much time in dark underground areas can become fatiguing to players, and this is even more significant in VR. This outdoor section provides a change of pace and a brief respite from the dark. Not only does it give players something visually different and interesting to look at, it allows them to clearly see and assess threat in an open space, allowing them to get some easy kills with a little stress. It was also important to provide some variety here, as players are about to head into a dark area that requires precision shooting and flashlight usage.
So, when we get the Combine off of Earth, what are you gonna do?
I'm going full production mode on the Russells, of course.
Oh, of course. You'll be sitting on a landmine.
Gold mine, yep. So here's the plan. Conservative estimate, I figure 1 year to get the world unconquered by the Combine, get them off the planet, so that's year 1, then another year to mass produce the Russells. Although, just quietly, we will need to rebuild society first, to get some basic infrastructure, jobs, money, that sort of thing. Otherwise people won't be able to buy them, So, 3-year plan. Let's slot the infrastructure thing in for year 2.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You're gonna want to put that in year 2.
This section, with a multitude of explosive barrels embedded in Zen overgrowth, was designed to switch up player expectations and change the pacing of the level. Prior to this point in the game, explosive barrels and canisters were used as offensive weapons. In this space, they're deadly to the player. If a barrel or canister does explode, it sets off a fatal chain reaction. This change in priority forces players to aim carefully and adds intensity without combat. This has the positive side effect of training players to utilize the pistol even more effectively. While the automatic alignment of the flashlight with a braced weapon is useful in direct combat, in this section we observed players taking advantage of the decoupled weapon and flashlight as they illuminated and targeted barnacles in the intricate Zen foliage overhead.
Oh boy. Getting dark again.
Oh, careful, careful!
We decided early on that the environments we wanted to portray in Half-Life Alyx would benefit from an investment in high-quality volumetric lighting. This component of illumination is an indispensable tool, not just for creating atmosphere, but for drawing the player's attention to critical gameplay elements. Our system works in 3 phases. In the first phase, illumination from static light sources is captured in a 3-level hierarchical volumetric clip map surrounding the player. The highest resolution level of this clip map measures 1 cubic inch per voxel. The clip map is updated incrementally, less than once per frame, as the player moves throughout the scene. In the second phase, a compute shader ray marches in view space throughout the clip maps, accumulating static lighting, dynamic lighting, and volumetric extinction. Ray marching is performed every frame and employs temporal anti-aliasing to improve quality. In the final phase, we resample lighting and volumetric scattering from the prior phase for each eye once per frame. The result is a texture that describes, for any given view space depth, volumetric scattering and extinction, which we apply during forward rendering.
Fun fact, only 10.1% of viewers are subscribed to Half Peeps. If you enjoy the videos, do consider subscribing. For science, you monster.